Sarah Miller didn't believe in fate, but she remembered the exact second her life changed. And it wasn't when her mother died last week or when she became a single parent 5 years ago. It was the moment she heard a man behind her whisper something obscene and felt a stranger next to her shift in his seat like a fuse had just been lit. It happened 32 minutes after takeoff. She was seated in 22B on a full evening flight from Chicago to Boston, returning from a funeral with a suitcase of folded grief and a daughter sleeping softly at her side. The man beside her hadn't said much. He wore a dark hoodie and kept his gaze-forward posture quiet but watchful, the kind of stillness that didn't read as indifference but readiness. Sarah hadn't paid much attention. She wasn't in the mood for small talk, and besides, she was used to doing things on her own. Then came the voice 2 rows behind her, low wet with arrogance. "Bet you'd be warmer without that jacket," the man said behind her. "Why don't you take it off, sweetheart?" Sarah froze. The words were said softly, but they dripped down her spine like cold oil. She didn't turn. She didn't respond. He said something else closer this time, and she felt it. A hand grazing the back of her seat fingertips, inching where they shouldn't be. She sat up straighter. "Please don't touch me," she said, firm but even. Then the mocking laugh behind her. And that's when the man beside her moved. Not dramatically, not violently. He simply unbuckled his seatbelt and stood smooth and silent like someone trained not to hesitate. Sarah barely had time to process what was happening. But something about the way he positioned himself, not between her and the man, but slightly in front, angled and ready, told her this wasn't the first time he'd had to do something like this. The harasser raised his hands with a smirk. "Hey, take it easy, man. Just talking." "You need to stop," the stranger said quietly. The entire row seemed to hold its breath. "I said back off." The way he said it, not loud, not aggressive, made the words even sharper, like they were carved from stone. The man behind them laughed again. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The stranger tilted his head slightly, as if deciding whether to answer. Then he spoke. "I'm the last person you want to test at 30,000 feet. That was all it took. A nearby attendant approached. Passengers had started whispering. Within minutes, the man behind Sarah was being escorted to the back of the plane, swearing under his breath. The stranger sat back down. No victory grin, no dramatic gesture, just silence. Sarah turned toward him slowly, her pulse still racing. "Thank you," she said, voice soft but full. He nodded once. "You're welcome." She looked at him more closely now. Strong jaw eyes alert, scanning the cabin, subtly hands still resting steady on his lap. There was something about the way he carried himself. Not like someone trying to prove anything, more like someone who had already seen too much. "I'm Sarah," she offered, still a little breathless. "Alex," he said. No last name, no questions, just calm. And though she didn't know it yet, Sarah had just met a man who didn't only serve his country. He would soon change the course of her life. The cabin had gone quiet again. The kind of quiet that lingers after something just barely avoided becoming worse. Sarah sat motionless, one hand resting over Lily's shoulder. Her daughter hadn't stirred during the entire exchange. Still asleep, small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Sarah gently pulled the blanket higher, her fingers trembling slightly as the adrenaline wore off. Alex hadn't moved since sitting back down. He looked straight ahead, as if the incident meant nothing. But Sarah noticed his shoulders, broad square, hadn't relaxed. He was still alert, still calculating. "Do things like that happen often?" she asked, her voice low. He turned to her just slightly. "Too often." There was a calmness to him, but not passive. Controlled, like someone who had learned long ago how to stay composed while others unraveled. "Thank you," she said again, and meant it. He gave the barest nod. "You shouldn't have to say it. That kind of thing shouldn't happen to anyone." Sarah let out a soft breath and leaned back in her seat. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been the entire flight. After a few minutes of silence, she glanced sideways. "You don't exactly seem like a guy who works in tech." That earned the slightest curve of a smile from him. "Why is that?" She shrugged. "Just a guess." You didn't hesitate. The way you stood up, it felt like you'd done that before. Alex was quiet for a beat. "Military," he finally said. She looked at him again. Really looked. The posture, the gaze, the calm. It all made sense now. "Army, Air Force." He said, then paused. "Retired." "Sort of." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Sort of." He didn't answer right away. Just looked down at his hands for a second before turning back to her. "Still do some work. Let's leave it at that." She nodded, understanding the line he'd just drawn. There were things he didn't say, and she wouldn't push. Another beat of silence passed. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, switching to the soft amber of night mode. Sarah folded her arms and exhaled slowly. "I didn't think this flight would be the part of the week that scared me the most." Alex turned to her. "Rough trip." "My mother's funeral." He nodded once. No awkward condolences, no cheap sympathy. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Sarah appreciated that. "What about you?" she asked. "What brings you on this flight?" "Work mostly." He didn't elaborate, and strangely, she didn't need him to. There was a shared silence between them. Not uncomfortable, more like the kind that exists between two people who understand things they don't need to explain. Lily stirred slightly, shifting against Sarah's arm. Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair back and kissed the top of her head. Alex's gaze lingered on the little girl for a moment. "She your only one?" Sarah nodded. "Lily. 5 years old and somehow older than me on most days?" He gave a faint smile. "She's lucky. You're strong." She raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "You gathered all that from watching me try to hold it together in C2B." "No," Alex said. "From how fast you stood your ground." Sarah stared at him for a moment, then looked away. Not because she was embarrassed, but because the words had hit closer than she expected. Outside, the snow was still falling across the night sky, swirling in the window like quiet chaos. Inside, Sarah realized something. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight of the moment alone. 2 hours later, the plane touched down on an unfamiliar runway. Snow was falling heavier now, slanting sideways in the wind as the aircraft taxied toward a small terminal. Sarah peered through the window, confused by the lack of city lights. "This isn't Boston," she murmured. Alex didn't respond right away, but he was already leaning slightly forward, reading the tension in the cabin like a soldier scanning a map. The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to worsening weather systems over the East Coast and airspace congestion, we've made an unscheduled landing at Oakwood Regional Airport in Ohio. We'll be refueling and awaiting further clearance. We appreciate your patience." A wave of frustration swept through the rows. Groan sighs, the quick tapping of phones trying to reconnect. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, the exhaustion catching up with her. A layover in the middle of nowhere, a funeral behind her, and her daughter still curled asleep against her side. She felt the spiral coming. Alex's voice cut through gently. "Hey, breathe. One thing at a time." She opened her eyes. "You always this calm during storms?" His lips twitched. "No. I've just been through worse ones." A few moments later, the plane came to a full stop. The doors opened with a sharp hiss, and freezing air rushed in. Passengers were given the option to deplane into the small terminal to wait. Sarah hesitated. Lily was still asleep, but Alex had already stood up, reaching for her carry-on. "I've got it," he said without asking. Sarah looked up at him. She didn't say no. The terminal was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of instant coffee and tired air. Fold-out chairs lined the walls. A vending machine flickered near the far end. Alex led the way, clearing a space in the corner where it was warmest. Sarah sat down carefully, cradling Lily in her lap. She'll be out for a while, Sarah murmured. Alex sat next to her, glancing around. Not the worst place I've been stuck. Sarah followed his gaze. Bet it's not the best either. No, he agreed, smiling faintly. But at least here, nobody's shooting at us. She gave him a look. That a joke? He shrugged. Not really. For a moment, silence stretched between them again. But this one felt different. Not awkward, just full. Sarah shifted slightly. You said you're still active. Consulting, Alex replied. Mostly off the record. I train teams advise handle sensitive assets. She raised an eyebrow. You make it sound like you're in a spy movie. His expression didn't change. Sometimes it feels that way. Before she could respond, a woman in a staff jacket approached with a clipboard. Sorry to interrupt, she said gently. We're assigning hotel vouchers for families with children. There's limited space, so we're prioritizing single parents. Sarah blinked. That would be... Yeah, that's us. The woman nodded. Great. We're assigning shared shuttles, 2 adults per room max. So if you're traveling alone... She's with me, Alex said before Sarah could speak. The woman gave him a quick glance, then wrote something on the clipboard and walked off. Sarah turned to him wide-eyed. You didn't have to. I know, Alex said calmly. But I also know it's past midnight, you haven't slept, and you're not dragging a 5-year-old through more paperwork. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, she said again. And this time, it wasn't just about the room. The hotel wasn't much, just a roadside stop with beige walls and thin carpet, but it was warm and it was quiet. They were given a room with 2 queen beds. Sarah tucked Lily into one and stood for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Alex set her suitcase down in the corner. Then without a word took a step back and sat on the edge of the other bed. I can take the floor if that makes it easier, he said, his voice even. Sarah shook her head. It's fine. You've done enough. She sat across from him. There was a lamp between them, casting a soft golden light across the space. For the first time that night, neither of them had anywhere else to be. You always step in like that? She asked quietly. With strangers on planes? He thought for a moment. No, he said. Only when I know what silence can cost. Sarah didn't ask what that meant. She just watched him. The quiet posture, the measured words, the look of someone who had once made a promise they couldn't afford to break. She didn't know the full story, but for the first time she wanted to. It was nearly 1 a.m. Outside, snow danced under a flickering street lamp just beyond the hotel window. Inside the quiet room, Sarah sat cross-legged on her bed arms, around her knees, facing Alex across the space between them. Lily was still asleep, breathing evenly in the other bed, one arm flung over her stuffed penguin. Sarah's voice broke the silence. You said silence can cost something. Alex didn't flinch. He didn't rush to fill the space either. He just stared at the carpet for a long moment, like someone choosing the right memory out of a drawer filled with ones he'd rather forget. Her name was Maya, he said finally. Sarah stayed quiet. She was a local interpreter, Afghanistan. Smart Fearless knew more about real courage than half the men I served with. He leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his thighs. There was intel, a threat we didn't act on soon enough. I didn't speak up. I waited. Wanted confirmation. Protocol. He looked at Sarah, his eyes steady. She didn't make it. Sarah felt the words settle in the room like dust. I'm sorry, she said quietly. She was 23, Alex continued. Didn't flinch under fire, didn't beg for help. She deserved better than my hesitation. Sarah wanted to reach for something to say, but there was no answer to that kind of loss. She knew that space, the space where guilt lived without noise. Alex sat forward again, elbows on his knees. So when I see someone too afraid to speak, I don't wait anymore. Sarah nodded slowly. She understood that not just the loss, but the shift that happens inside you afterward. The new kind of compass you carry forever, pointing toward what you should have done. She ran a hand through her hair. When Lily was born, I didn't know if I could do it. My mom was sick. Her father wasn't there. Alex looked at her waiting. Sarah offered a half smile. Correction, he left before she was born. I guess he was more in love with the idea of being a dad than the actual job. She laughed lightly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I stayed in my hometown for years, took care of mom, worked 2 jobs, didn't go anywhere, didn't date, just kept everything together. I thought that was strength. It is, Alex said. Sarah looked up at him. He held her gaze. You're still standing. That counts. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She turned away slightly, blinking fast. Alex stood quietly and crossed to the hotel mini-fridge. He pulled out 2 small water bottles and handed one to her. Hydration helps, he said, with a soft smirk. She laughed genuinely this time. Is that military wisdom? No, he replied. That's just what people say when they're too afraid to hand someone a tissue. She shook her head, smiling as she opened the bottle. Then in a quieter voice, I don't usually talk to strangers like this. I don't usually sit in Ohio hotel rooms with people I met 4 hours ago, Alex replied. So we're even. Sarah glanced at the clock. You should try to get some rest. He nodded. You too. He stood to switch off the light between the beds, pausing just a second longer than necessary. I meant what I said earlier. He added softer now. You're strong, even when you think no one sees it. Then he turned away, lay back on the bed and closed his eyes. Sarah lay down too, but sleep didn't come easily. She stared at the ceiling, listening to Lily breathe, listening to the silence between her and a man who had shown up in her life like a locked door swinging open in a storm. She didn't know what it meant yet, or if it meant anything, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah Miller didn't feel like she was carrying everything alone. And somehow in the stillness of a snowy Ohio night, that was everything. The next morning came quietly. Outside the motel window, the storm had passed. Snow clung to car roofs and tree branches like leftover memories, soft and fragile under a pale gray sky. The shuttle to the airport arrived early, idling by the curb, with fog swirling around its tires. Sarah stood by the mirror, brushing out Lily's hair, while the little girl yawned and clutched her penguin. Alex waited at the door, already packed his hoodie, zipped his gaze distant the same way it had been when he first sat down beside her on the plane. He didn't say much during the ride back. Neither did Sarah. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable now. It felt like something earned a space where trust had settled in. By noon, they were back in the sky. No turbulence this time. No detours, no confrontations in row 22, just quiet. Lily drew pictures in her seat. Alex read something on his phone. Sarah stared out the window at the bright expanse of cloud and sky, trying not to think too hard about what came next. Boston was always loud when he landed. Concrete horns movement. Sarah had spent most of her life trying to survive in it. But now, stepping off that plane, she felt something else creeping in. She didn't want to say goodbye. At baggage claim, Sarah retrieved their suitcase while Lily held on to Alex's hand casually, like she'd done it 100 times before. It made Sarah pause. Alex noticed, gently letting go. She's a strong kid. Sarah nodded. She gets it from her grandmother. They stood there for a moment in that awkward space between strangers and something more. Well, Sarah said, finally breaking the quiet. Thanks for everything. Alex looked at her. Really? He asked, holding her gaze. You need a ride? She hesitated. No, we're good. My friend is picking us up. Alex nodded. Okay. Sarah extended her hand. Take care of yourself. He shook it firm and steady. You too. Then he turned and walked away. Sarah watched him go, a strange tightness in her chest. Lily looked up and asked, Will we see him again? Sarah didn't answer. 3 days passed. Sarah returned to her normal routine, waking up early, packing Lily's lunch, working long shifts at the clinic downtown. The rhythm of her life resumed like a song she hadn't realized she'd memorized. But something felt different. Her apartment felt quieter. The streets felt colder. Not because the temperature had changed, but because she had. That night, while Lily was asleep, Sarah opened her laptop and typed his name into the search bar, Alex Cole. At first, nothing came up that looked like him, but then she found it. A press release 6 years old, a blurred photo of him in uniform. Colonel Alex Cole decorated for leadership in a hostage recovery mission overseas. Details were sparse. Most of the story had been redacted. She stared at the screen for a long time. He hadn't told her any of that. Not the title, not the commendation. He had protected her like it was second nature. Not for praise, not for recognition, just because it was the right thing to do. Sarah closed the laptop. Her heart was racing. The next morning, the doorbell rang at 8 a.m. Sarah wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door slowly. Alex stood there out of uniform. No suitcase, no shield of distance in his eyes. Just him. "I had some leave time stored up," he said. "Thought I'd use it." Sarah blinked. "How did you—" He held up his phone with a quiet shrug. "Your address was on the luggage tag. I wrote it down just in case." There was no arrogance in the way he said it. Just simple honesty. A man who hadn't wanted to leave things unfinished. He reached into his jacket. "Also, your daughter left something behind on the plane." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Lily's drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. Sarah looked at it, then back at him. She stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in." Alex nodded. One stepped over the threshold, and just like that, something shifted again. Not dramatically, not with fireworks, but with quiet certainty. Sometimes life reroutes you through places you never planned to go. And sometimes the detour turns out to be exactly where you were meant to land. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. Sarah poured hot water over 2 mugs, the steam curling upward as she reached for the tea bags. In the living room, Lily giggled at her own drawing coloring in the stick figure labeled Alex with a bright orange crayon. Alex stood nearby, hands in his pockets, scanning the framed photos on the shelf. Sarah and her mom. Sarah and Scrubs, holding a newborn baby. Lily's first steps, caught in a blur. Everything in the apartment felt lived in and honest. Not polished, not curated, just real. Sarah handed him a mug. "Chamomile. It's the only thing I had." "I've had worse," Alex said, taking it with a nod. He sat down on the couch, looking slightly out of place in a space filled with pastel toys and warm blankets. But somehow he fit there too. Not because he tried to, but because he didn't. Sarah sat across from him, wrapping her hands around her own cup. "I still can't believe you showed up." "I wasn't sure I would," he admitted. "Then I saw that drawing." He nodded toward Lily, who was now carefully giving herself bunny ears in her sketch. Sarah smiled. "She doesn't let people in easily. But with you, it was like she'd known you before." He looked down for a moment, as if the compliment made him uncomfortable. "I think kids can tell," he said, "when someone means it." Sarah took a quiet breath. The air between them was calm, warm, a kind of peace that had been rare in her life. But peace, she had learned, didn't always last. There was a knock at the door. Sarah frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone." She walked over and opened it. A man in a dark suit stood there, tall, well-groomed, with a badge clipped discreetly to his belt. His eyes shifted past Sarah, landing squarely on Alex. "Colonel Cole," the man said. Sarah's spine straightened. Alex stood slowly, his entire posture changed, shoulders squared, voice firm. "I told command I was on leave." "I'm not here for command," the man replied. "I'm here because of the Cairo file." Alex didn't blink. "That file is sealed." "Not anymore." Sarah looked between them. "What's going on?" Alex turned to her, his voice quieter now. It's nothing, just a formality. The man spoke again. You're not under investigation, Colonel, but we do need to ask you a few questions. Now. Alex exhaled slowly, then looked back at Sarah. I'm sorry. Without another word, he stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind him. Sarah stood there motionless, her tea cooling in her hand. Lily looked up. Where did Alex go? Sarah swallowed the knot rising in her throat. He had to take care of something. Outside, Alex walked beside the agent in silence, snow crunching beneath their boots. The man finally spoke. You sure about this, getting involved with civilians? Alex didn't answer. He just kept walking, not toward danger, not toward safety. The apartment felt different without him. Sarah stood in the kitchen long after the door closed, the untouched mugs of tea still steaming faintly on the table. Lily had returned to her drawings unbothered, but Sarah couldn't shake the look in Alex's eyes before he left. It wasn't fear. It was resignation, like he'd been here before, walking away from something good before it got too close. She sat down, scrolling through the text thread she never started. His number was saved, but no messages had been exchanged since the day they parted at baggage claim. He hadn't left anything behind. No note, no explanation. Just that look that said, I'm sorry. Sarah wanted to believe it was just work, some unfinished duty calling him back. But that man at the door, the way he spoke the words Cairo file, it didn't feel routine. It felt like a secret. That night after Lily fell asleep, Sarah found herself at her laptop again. She hesitated only a second before typing Alex Cole Cairo file. At first the results were vague. Then she saw it. A brief article scrubbed of details buried in the archives of a military watchdog blog. SEAL-linked operation in Cairo sparks quiet controversy. Civilian casualty rumors surface. No names, no confirmations, but one line stood out. Sources suggest that a decorated U.S. officer temporarily suspended operations after the mission, citing personal responsibility for a decision that cost the wrong person their life. Sarah leaned back slowly. She thought of the way Alex had spoken about Maya, about waiting too long, about silence having a cost. He had been talking about Cairo. He had been talking about her. The next day passed without a word. By evening, Sarah tried calling. Straight to voicemail. She debated texting, then deleted the message halfway through. It felt too small, too surface level for everything she wanted to say. Instead, she stood in the hallway outside Lily's room, watching her daughter fall asleep, with the same drawing still taped to the wall. 3 stick figures, one of them taller than the others, arms stretched wide. She wondered what Alex would say if he knew they hadn't taken it down. She wondered if he would ever come back. But he did. Not the next day. Not the day after. A week passed. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning just after sunrise, Sarah opened her front door to take out the trash and saw him standing at the bottom of the stairs. Same hoodie, same stillness. Only this time, he looked tired. Not physically, but like someone who had stopped running. She froze. He didn't move. I shouldn't have left the way I did, Alex said. I thought I was protecting you by keeping my past out of your life. Sarah didn't say anything. Not yet. He stepped forward. But what I didn't realize is that maybe you weren't the one who needed protecting. A long silence passed between them. Then finally Sarah spoke. What happened in Cairo? Alex looked down. When I gave the order to move, a child was in the building. We didn't see her until it was too late. Sarah's breath caught. He looked up again. That's the thing about command. You live with decisions no one else remembers, but you don't forget. Not ever. Sarah stepped aside. Come in. He hesitated. Are you sure? She nodded. You're not the only one who's had to live with ghosts. Alex stepped over the threshold, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but permission. The door clicked shut behind them. Alex stood just inside Sarah's apartment, hands by his sides, like he didn't know whether to sit or keep standing at attention. Sarah crossed the room, slowly watching him. He wasn't the same man who sat beside her on that plane. He wasn't even the same man who'd helped her carry her daughter through a snowstorm in Ohio. He looked stripped down, honest in a way she hadn't seen before. "You didn't have to come back," Sarah said. "I know," Alex replied. But not coming back felt worse. She didn't speak, just watched as he stepped forward and placed something on the table. His wallet. He opened it quietly and slid out a thin, dark green military ID. The lettering was sharp, the title beneath his name, Colonel United States Air Force. "I figured it was time you saw it," he said. Sarah looked down at the card, then up at him. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Alex didn't flinch. "Because I didn't want to be that guy on the plane. The uniform, the past, the weight. I wanted to be someone you looked at and didn't flinch." Sarah took a slow breath. "I never flinched, Alex. I just didn't know." He nodded. A quiet moment passed between them. Then Lily came padding into the room, still in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She blinked at Alex, then grinned. "You came back." Alex smiled, kneeling. "I said I would." Sarah watched as Lily threw her arms around him. It was so natural it hurt a little. When Alex stood, Sarah gestured toward the kitchen. "Come on, I'll make coffee." They sat at the kitchen table while the coffee brewed, the air warm with quiet steam and something unspoken. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. Alex looked at her, eyes steady. "That depends on you." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I've spent most of my life being deployed to wars, to missions, to people who needed me for something I could solve. But this," he gestured toward her apartment, towards Lily's drawing still on the fridge, "this isn't a mission. And I don't want to be here just because I saved you on a plane, Sarah." She swallowed. "I want to be here because I'm choosing it," Alex continued. "Not out of duty, but because this is the first thing in a long time that feels real." A silence stretched between them, soft but full. Then Sarah leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. "Do you know what the scariest part of doing this alone has been?" Alex shook his head. "Knowing that if something went wrong, no one would know but me. That if I broke down at 2 a.m., no one would notice." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. "I don't need a hero, Alex. I just want someone who shows up." He met her gaze. "Then I'm already halfway there?" Sarah exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders like a slow, unraveling thread. She reached across the table, not with a declaration, not with a promise, but just her hand palm up. Alex placed his over it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. That afternoon, they took Lily to the park. She ran through piles of golden leaves, while Alex stood beside Sarah on the bench, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Sarah glanced at him. "You know she's drawing you into everything now." "I noticed," he said. "I'm apparently a superhero and a dinosaur in the same picture." Sarah laughed. He looked at her, and this time not like a man weighed down by uniform, past mistakes, or unread reports, but like someone who had finally arrived. Not in a place, but in a life. Fall gave way to early winter. The city dimmed a little earlier each day, and Sarah's block wore a quiet stillness broken only by the crunch of leaves under hurried feet and the laughter of children layered in scarves and mittens. Inside Sarah's apartment, things had found a rhythm. Not perfect, not choreographed, but real. Alex came by most evenings after training sessions on base. Lily always ran to the door first, asking if he brought cookies or stories. Sometimes he brought both. Other times, just a look in his eyes that said, "It's been a long day, but I still wanted to be here." Sarah started leaving the porch light on even before he texted. She never said it out loud, but he always noticed. One Friday afternoon, Sarah's clinic held a community event. Flu shots, free screenings, a warm meal for those who needed it. She hadn't expected Alex to show up. He didn't like being around crowds. Too many eyes, too many exits to track. But as she handed out forms near the front desk, she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway. Civilian clothes, quiet presence. Lily was beside him, holding his hand tightly and waving with her free one. Sarah's heart caught in her chest. Later that night, after Lily had gone to sleep, they sat together on Sarah's fire escape with blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Steam rose from their mugs. The city blinked and hummed below them. "Today meant something to you," Alex said. Sarah nodded. "It always does." He looked at her for a moment, then out at the skyline. "You make it look easy?" Sarah smiled. "It's not." "I know," he said. "That's why it's beautiful." There was a pause. Then Alex reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. No fanfare, no speech, just a folded piece of paper. Sarah took it carefully and opened it. Inside was a letter, formal, stamped, and official. His discharge papers. Honorable, immediate. She looked up confused. "What is this? I'm done," Alex said. "With deployments, with disappearing, with living a life where everything is temporary except regret." Sarah's eyes filled, but she didn't speak. "I've served long enough to know what matters, and for the first time, I want to serve something I chose." He looked at her, his voice lower now. "I choose this." Tears spilled before she could stop them, but her smile came with them. She whispered, "I never asked you to give it all up." "I know," Alex said, "but I want to because for once, I'm not answering a call sign." He reached for her hand. "I'm answering you." 1 year later, Sarah stood at the front of a small school auditorium. Lily was graduating from her kindergarten class, beaming, holding a hand-drawn certificate, waving at her mom from the stage. Alex stood in the back, quiet as always, but not hiding anymore. Teachers nodded at him. Parents smiled. Lily ran straight into his arms when the ceremony ended. Sarah watched as Alex knelt, lifted Lily into the air, and spun her once. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He didn't need it. Everything that mattered was already in his arms. She walked over and Lily reached for her mother with the other hand. The three of them standing under a string of paper stars taped to the auditorium walls. And in that moment, Sarah understood something she hadn't on that flight a year ago. Sometimes the hero in your story isn't the one who swoops in with glory. It's the one who stays. If this story moved, inspired you, or reminded you of the quiet heroes around us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We share powerful stories like this every